the love of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, one down salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألف لام را. كتاب أنزلناه إليك لتخرج الناس من الظلمات إلى النور بإذن ربهم إلى صراط العزيز الحميد. آمنا بالله. Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam. My respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. عظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا أبي عبد الله الحسين صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. How can Islam be a force for good in the world? The series we have been conducting has been to open our thoughts and compare and contrast the way in which we have inherited our Islam versus the way in which we have been practicing our Islam, versus the vision as to what Islam could be. And when you compare and contrast between the way in which Islam is being practiced today versus the sort of discussions we've been having, I would humbly argue that these two versions of Islam are very, very different. For example, the way in which women are treated in the world today versus the way in which prophetic Islam ensured the rights and liberation of women in the context of the challenges that they found themselves in. Where do you find that Islam today? Or for example, the type of Islam we mentioned on another night about the redistribution of wealth, that the companions of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, when they earned something above their needs, they immediately imagined it the right of someone else. Whereas today, many of us, the moment we gain some wealth, we try to spend as much or all of it as possible on our own selves. Can you see the difference between a prophetic vision of Islam and the ones that we have inherited, the ones that we see on a day-to-day basis? I would argue, really, it's quite incomparable. And it's no wonder Islam pushed forward throughout the world in its earliest decades, when Islam was of this mantra, when Islam was in this vision. There's one more issue that we need to think about tonight, in terms of the comparison between the way in which we see Islam being conducted in front of our eyes versus the type of Islam that was present at the time of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, the ones described in the Quran and Ahadith. And that is to compare the way in which Islam and the Muslim Ummah today performs its tabligh and its da'wah. The idea of us conveying our religion to others and making it a religion which they crave, a religion which they see as productive for them, as opposed to a religion that they see as being reductive for them. We mentioned on a previous night, we said, you imagine that when Islam came and started freeing slaves, whom do you think ran towards Islam and flocked to it in their numbers? And you rightly answered, the slaves. Because they found that for the first time in their lives, Not only were they given rights, but they were respected and given dignity. They wanted to be part of a religion like this. They were willing to fight and to die for it. Or for example, those who were considered black and third-class citizens in Hijaz, just because of the color of their skin. When the Prophet came and said, there is no difference between white and black, Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. Can you imagine who rushed towards Islam? Those yesterday who were treated as dirt, because they found that Islam was a protection for them, an honor for them. Or, for example, if we found that women were being treated in the way in which they were, when they found that there was a home rights for them, they rushed towards Islam. This was the type of Islam that we had. Now, if you understand this and you see the way in which tabligh and da'wah is being done today, for the most part, it is more off-putting than it is positive. It is more cringeworthy than it is positive. We have many of these sort of contrarian spaces where these online imams and debating, and then it trickles down into the shabab in the way in which they deal with one another in the social media sphere. Click on any debate forum, any discussion forum, click onto any Twitter thread and see the way in which the youth are speaking to one another, the way in which they are calling towards Islam, the way in which they are actually putting people off Islam by virtue of their akhlaq. And this has become very popular and very famous. You all know, for example, here Jordan Peterson in Canada. And recently, several months back, he engaged in a sort of discussion with probably the world's most famous online da'wah imam. You probably heard of someone called Muhammad Hijab. And those sorts of people. These are not people of insight and depth and knowledge. These are not experts in theology. They've not spent their life studying. These are people who know how to create a 60-second zinger and then use it for a clip in order to go viral with. This is not the way Islam wants us to be spreading the faith. It's not something that is of depth. It's not something of longevity. But this is the way in which we have arrived in this time today. What I want to be able to demonstrate to you tonight, inshallah, for a brief time, is to show you how Islam took care, so much care, of a particular class of people that they ran towards Islam and were willing to give everything that they had for it. And if instead of people creating 60-second reels or going on Twitter and wasting everybody's time with bad language and false ahadith and actually in a space that is more contrarian than actually doing good, if we actually saw the way the Quran and Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam designed the world of tabligh and da'wah for us to be able to spread our faith, to be able to invite people towards the faith, we might actually for once have a little bit of a structure to what we are doing in this world. Now think about this question. In the Shia world, forget Muhammad Hijab and sort of this ilk. In the Shia world, what is the strategy for tabligh and da'wah? I don't mean things like majlis and muhadarat. I don't mean the online clips that are there. What is the strategy that is in place? Whom is leading that? For example, in Africa, you've probably heard of an organization, phenomenal organization called Bilal Muslim Mission. Have you come across this? And of course, Bilal Muslim Mission in Africa is targeting black Africans. You all know how there is a very strong Christian movement to bring people towards the faith of Christianity. They build hospitals, they build clinics, they build sort of pipes in order to bring wells and so on and so forth. In the Shia world, in Africa as an example, there is Bilal Muslim Mission, which targets a certain group of people through their language, through their culture, and tries to bring people towards the faith of Islam. It has brought thousands and thousands of people towards the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam over the years in which it's been running. If I was to ask, in Greater Vancouver, or in London, or in Manchester, or in Birmingham, or in Sydney, what is the specific method of tabligh and da'wah that targets non-Muslims? Could you point to one? Yes or no? No? Could you point to one? No. Isn't that sad? Isn't it sad that now as second, third, fourth generation Muslims in these countries, we don't actually know how to be able to spread our own faith other than, for example, doing majlis. And even then, tonight, mashallah, if there's anyone who's from the non-Shia faith tonight, please put your hand up. 1, 2. Can you see? In a room full of 300 people on the night in which we are commemorating the greatest tragedy in the history of humanity, there's only 2 non-Shi'as in the entirety of the room. There's no spreading of our faith. Practically. Many communities imagine that when they're going out on masira or julus, they go outside, people take off their shirts, they're doing ma'tam, they're doing it in a language in which no one understands. And still in 2023, we're having to have that argument. You don't need to recite the Latamiyya in a language in which people don't understand. They don't understand it. How is it going to benefit them? How's the poetry going to help them come towards Islam? In 2023, we're still having these conversations. What I want to be able to do tonight, inshallah, is show you from the Quran and Ahadith how there was a methodology of bringing people towards Islam. And that was lifting them out of the challenges in their life, especially the poverties that they had. As we mentioned, the slaves, when they saw it was productive for them, they ran towards Islam. Women found protection and rights in Islam, they ran towards Islam. That group that can be targeted, especially those who are economically impoverished or targeted systematically, Islam has a way to be able to bring them towards Islam and to try to open up their hearts to an ideal that there is genuinely a religion out there that cares for their struggles and is going to work on their behalf. Now I'm going to give you a scenario. Maybe you and I can think about this as we go along. Again, just for the sake of numbers, I'm going to say that there's 200 or 300 people in the room. Do you remember we mentioned that whatever is surplus to your needs is the right of someone else? So let's say, for the sake of argument, in a month, on average, everyone in this room, on average, has $100 surplus. Is that possible? Can we imagine that? It's not too high, is it? Some people will have zero surplus. Some people have $1,000 surplus. So for the sake of argument, I'm just saying everyone in this room has $100 surplus. If there's 300 people here tonight, how much is that per month in surplus, in total? $30,000. And across 12 months, $360,000. Immediately, that's a huge amount raised, isn't it? Right? If you gave someone $360,000, what would they do with it? How could they actually bring people towards Islam? This is what I want to be able to show you tonight. If you understand that we can easily sustain these projects, the way the Quran gives us these opportunities, the way the Ahadith gives us insight into doing this work, there's a lot we can be doing for the world out there, specifically through the methodologies of tabligh and da'wah, inshallah. With your kindness, please recite aloud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Please open your Qur'ans to chapter number 9, Surah At-Tawbah, verse 128. I want you to compare this ayah to the online contrarian world of sort of mudslinging and a 60-second zinger in a debate that the Muhammad hijabs of the world have monetized. I want you to look at the character of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, number one, and to see what his concerns are. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ عَزِيزٌ عَلَيْهِ مَا عَنِتُّمْ حَرِيصٌ عَلَيْكُمْ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَؤُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ. Certainly a messenger has come to you from amongst yourselves, grievous to him, hard for him to bear is you falling into distress and difficulties. Excessively caring is he for you, and to the believers, Ra'ufun Rahim. He is utmost compassionate, utmost merciful. You see, when you have someone online who's just shouting blindly at the other person, arguing with them, trying to do a one-up on them, compared to the prophetic characteristic, the Prophet is deeply concerned with what happens in our life. If you fall ill, he's deeply concerned. He would have visited you. If you lost your job, he is deeply concerned. He would have found one for you. If you needed a loan, he is deeply concerned for you. He would have arranged one for you. If you lost a family member, he would have been there at the funeral to support you. This is the example of the Prophet. He is deeply concerned with what goes on in our life and the hardships and the tragedies and the trials and tribulations that occur within our lives. Now this is a starting point. When you go to the ahadith, Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam encourage us to be able to assist in a particular set of ways. I brought with me, as an example, Kitab Wasa'il al-Shi'a from the great scholar Al-Hurr Al-Amili, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh. And I want to show you the way in which Al-Hurr Al-Amili speaks, or the ahadith that he has recorded speaks about the concerns that we are supposed to have for certain people in certain ways. Please open your Qur'ans again to chapter number 9, Surah At-Tawbah, verse number 60. This is an ayah that we started a previous night, but I want to just mention as an example, and then we go into some of these points. Everybody has the ayah? أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والمؤلفة قلوبهم وفي الرقاب. This is where we got to. Sadaqat is for the fuqara, the masakin, the amilina alayha, those who work full-time for the ummah or part-time for the ummah. وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُم, to unite the hearts of people. وَفِي الرِّقَابِ, to be able to free slaves. We talked about the ayah until this point on a previous night. Now look at the next part of the verse. وَالْغَارِمِينَ, and those who are overburdened with debts. Islam actually sought to be able to help people financially in certain ways to free them from the daunting fiscal and economic challenges that they find of their life. And I want to compare the way the Quran in Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam explains this versus the way the Western world acts with exactly the same issues in comparison to Islam. So I'm going to mention a few ahadith that I want to compare and contrast. Did you know that in Islam, if you go bankrupt, na'udhu billah, if you go bankrupt, principally, you cannot lose your house. Did you know this? Hands up, how many of you knew this, that in Islam, if you go bankrupt and you can't pay your mortgage, in Islam, you cannot lose your house? Hands up, how many knew this? 1, 2. No? Okay. You all know what happens in the West and in other parts of the world, correct? What happens? If you can't pay your mortgage, what does the bank do? Forecloses the house, it takes it off you. Where are you left? Where? Without a house. You have to start again. But of course now, which bank is going to want to give to you a loan, whereas previously, now your credit is so bad because you couldn't pay your previous mortgage. In Islam, if you lose your house, if you go bankrupt, there is principally no such thing as you losing your house. I want to mention this quickly in a hadith. Hadith comes to us, for example, from our sixth Imam, Jaffer ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. Remember, I'm reading to you from Wasa'il al-Shia. Hadith says, قال قلت رجل لي عليه دراهم وكانت داره رهنا فأردت أن أبيعها. One of the companions says that there's a person who owes me a loan and he has a house on mortgage. وكانت داره رهنا. He has a house on mortgage. فأردت أن أبيعها. So because he owes me a debt, I intend to sell his house for him so that he pays me back my debt. Ordinary case, if you owe someone and he says, you have the house, sell your house to pay me my debt back, correct? فقال أبو عبد الله الصادق عليه السلام أعوذك بالله أن تخرجه من ذل رأسه. I seek refuge with Allah from taking someone out of their house. This is mentioned time and time and time again, by the way. I could mention to you it over and over and over again, but for the sake of brevity. Once, there's a companion by the name of Mu'adh ibn Jabal, companion of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Mu'adh ibn Jabal, a companion of high stature. One small problem that he had was that he wasn't very smart with money. He was very wealthy, well-to-do, but he wasn't very good with his money. You know what he used to do? He used to spend so much in the way of Islam that actually he took on so much debt that he became bankrupt. Whenever there was a cause, he would give to it. Whenever someone stood up and said we need a donation, he would give to it. MashaAllah, this is excellent, but Islam doesn't ask you to give away the entirety of your money until you become bankrupt. In fact, the hadith says that not only did he owe Muslims, he actually owed Jews in Medina from the loans. It got to a point where several of the creditors came and said, we want your money now. We want everything. You have to pay back our debts. Too long has come. Mu'adh ibn Jabal comes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. He says, Ya Rasulullah, they're taking everything. They're taking the business, they're taking the horses, they're taking the camels, they're taking the house. Can you intervene? The Prophet intervenes. He says to them, if you free Jabir of his debts, I guarantee you a place in Jannah today. 2 or 3 of them agreed and they let go of the debt. They said, no problem. Qard al-Hasana, we give it up. Several of them said, no. Our money is our money is our money. We want it back. So the Prophet then adjudicated and he said, well, this goes to pay off this creditor. This goes to pay off this creditor. At the end of it, Mu'adh ibn Jabal was still left with his house. The creditors came. They said, Ya Rasulullah, but he's still got a house to be able to live in. We should have that paid off on our behalf. Sell it or give it to us. Rasulullah said, in Islam, every human being has a right to a house, and therefore you do not get this from him. Everything else is gone. His business is gone. His camels are gone. But the house does not go. You do not have a right to be able to take a person out of the house. By the way, this is mentioned in hadith after hadith after hadith. Now, as an FYI, not only is it that Islam protects your house as a human right that you have. For example, not only that, is all the things that you would need to be able to perform your business soundly. For example, let's just say you were a taxi driver and you need the car to be able to do your job, or you need your car to get to your job. Islam protects that asset, because if you lose that means to your job, then how can you do anything else in the world? Another thing Islam protects is your food, your clothes, your kitchen utensils, because these are things that you would need to be able to cook with. These are the things that give you dignity and normalcy within life. Do you know what else is protected? Your books of ilm. Because ilm is more important than money. And so even if you're about to lose the rest of your wealth, if you have a library at home, that library cannot be taken in Islamic law. Did you know that? Now the reason why I tell you this is to compare and contrast it with the rest of the world or the Western world. If you, God forbid, lose your business or you lose your wealth, they take all these things from you. From the Islamic perspective, you have human rights. These things are protected for you. You know, I was reading an article before I came here. You all know Philadelphia in the United States of America. I don't know if you know this. Philadelphia's courts have a ruling that when someone is dispossessed of their house, they don't have cops coming to the house to take that possession off you. Now they have private contractors to come and dispossess you of your house. If you're a tenant or if you're a person who owns the house, they come and kick you out of the house. It's a private security firms that they go and pay. Did you know in the last month, there's been 3 shootings in order to try to take people out of their house when they've refused to leave? It's so bad in this world that they go so far that even they are going to shoot you. You can search this yourself, or I'll send you the article. In Philadelphia, just in one place in the States, in the last month, 3 shootings to be able to take you out of your house. Look at the difference between how Islam provides you with care and rights versus the way the rest of the world gives you this or takes it away from you. I'm asking you a simple question. With so many people struggling in the world, so many people losing their houses, especially when there's a bubble and it bursts in the economy, or right now in the UK where this year alone, 2022 to 2023, it's 18% inflation. 18% inflation in the UK. Literally, children are eating toilet paper in school to stave off hunger. Literally, this is what's happening in the UK. People are losing their houses. Imagine if you were able to present to the world an Islam that genuinely cared for people's rights. Instead of people tweeting back and forth at each other nonsense every single hour of the day. Can you imagine the difference that this world would have if you could show them how Islam cares for your rights, provides for you your rights? I'll give you another example. Please open up your phones. Go onto Google. And you can type in the following so that we're all seeing it at exactly the same time. So there's no sort of difference of opinion. Please type in Canada, payday loans, typical interest, or typical interest rate. Who can tell me what it says? Just so we all see the same thing. Say it loudly. 442% APR. Do you understand? If you need a payday loan, if you're running short at the end of the month, your tire bursts, you need to pay a bill off, and you want to loan $300. This is from the Canada.ca government website I'm reading to you. Payday loans. Let's say you need a $300 loan for household repairs. And you take it from a payday loan lender. Does everyone know what a payday loan lender is? What is it? Someone who will lend you money last minute at supremely higher rates than an ordinary bank. Ordinary bank will try to give you tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands in loan. If you need something to cover you for a month or two, payday loan lenders will give it to you $300, $500, $1,000. You all know this? They call themselves payday loan lenders. What they are is loan sharks. But the Western world sanitizes it with nonsense language to trick you to think that this is normal. In any other language, you'd call this a loan shark. If a mafia guy came to you on the street and lent you $300 at 442% APR and said at the end of it, I'm going to break your legs if you don't give it back to me, you'd call him a loan shark. This is from the Canada government website I'm reading to you. If you need $300 for household repairs, you get a loan of $300 for 2 weeks. You pay $51 in charges, which is the equivalent of an interest rate of 442% APR per annum. So now you owe $351. If you don't make payment at the end of the 2 weeks, there's a charge of $40. You now owe $391. So you've taken a loan of $300. You can't pay it back. You now are owing $391 on that month. And then in the next month, it goes up and up and up and up and exponentially up. Now, a person who needs $300 to get them through till the end of the month, they don't have $391 to pay it back with. The whole system is created to be able to exploit them and put them into further and further and further debt until eventually the loan becomes so substantial that something significant is taken from them. Their car, their house, whatever it may be. Now think about this very carefully, very carefully. How much is the interest rate in Islam? Say again? 0. Are you sure? Sure? Anyone have a higher rate than that? Good. If anyone said, 20% APR or whatever, a credit card APR, I would have to come down there. As you know, riba is haram in Islam. Now, riba isn't just interest. It's any fa'idah. It's any benefit. If I lend you $100 and say, pay me $100 back, but you have to mow my lawn on the weekend, that fa'idah, that benefit is haram. That's also riba. That's also interest in the eyes of Islam. Just so you know, okay? Now think about this very carefully. I want you to understand the way Islam did tabligh, the way Islam did da'wah to be able to help people. Okay? Imagine for a second. Every one of us in this room, we put $100 in our excess. What do we say? How much is it per month? 300 people, $100 a month becomes 30,000. And then in a year that becomes 360,000. And that's just here, right? You've got all the other centers, mashallah. You've got Al-Kawthar, you've got Al-Mustafa, you've got Al-Ghadir, you've got Al-Zahra. I imagine that you would very easily be able to raise, in terms of excess, I'm going to be completely honest and say tens of millions of dollars. But let's just call it $1 million for the sake of $1 million. Imagine there are people out there so desperately struggling to get through to the end of the month that they're getting $300 loans, $500 loans, $1,000 loans, and they're paying 442% APR. Imagine an ad campaign that said, in Islam, we are not allowed to exploit you. The Prophet Muhammad himself cared for you so much that the Quran described it Azizun alayhi. He is overwhelmed with grief at how difficult your life is. Muhammadi Bank exists, and if you need a payday loan of $300 or $500 or $700 to get you through to the end of the month, we will not charge you a penny in interest. Because that's how Islam cares for you. If the payday loan lenders can do it, me and you can do it. Instead of letting people think about Islam as oppressive and regressive and all they know about Sharia is this and that and this is Sharia. This is Sharia. Where Sharia actually cares about you. And if you need something, we, the Muslim community, is here to be able to serve. Can you imagine how many lives you could possibly, positively impact in the space of 1 month? And every month, that bank becomes replenished. Because if there's 300 of you, and every month you are putting in $100, that becomes $30,000. The importance is not how many people you serve. The point is actually to serve people the way Islam wanted you and I to be able to serve them. Let me show you one last hadith and then we try to conclude. This hadith again comes to us from this time our seventh holy Imam, Musa ibn Jaffer al-Kadhim, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. You all remember the ayah that I asked you to open. You still have it open? Chapter 9, verse 60. One of the causes that we're supposed to be raising sadaqat for is called al-gharimin. Have you heard of al-gharimin before? Al-gharimin are those people who are overburdened with debt. Let's say you are overburdened with debt. Islam seeks for us to come together and pay off your debts. Why? Because when you are stuck with debts, cyclical debts that you can't get yourself out of, your mind is so focused on paying off those debts, you can't focus on anything else. You can't focus on Allah, your family, your community, being of service to the ummah, because you're having to get a second and a third job and scramp here and your mental health is being targeted. Does Islam want you to live in this way? Of course not. You have a dignity, you have an honor. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, the Quran says. Allah has honored you with dignity, rights. Hands up, how many of you before this lecture knew that there's supposed to be a category of sadaqah that the Quran explicitly tells us that we're supposed to be raising funds and monies for people who are overburdened by debts? Sahm al-gharimin. Hands up, how many of you knew that before today? MashaAllah, it's the young girl again, she's put her hands up. Another one here. Think about this, it's explicit in the Quran. Are you reading the same Quran as me? You're reading it, right? You've read the ayah. I'm not lying to you, I'm not making it up, right? Have you seen the words al-gharimin just now in the Quran? Listen to the hadith by the seventh Imam alayhi salam. He says the following. من طلب هذا الرزق من حله ليعود به على نفسه وعياله. Whoever seeks rizq from its lawful places in order to be able to serve himself and his family. كَانَ كَالْمُجَاهِدِ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. He is like a mujahid in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَإِنْ غُلِبَ عَلَيْهِ. If he is overcome by debts, if he is overcome with burdensome debts, فَلْيَسْتَدِنْ عَلَى اللَّهِ وَعَلَى رَسُولِهِ. His loans that he has taken out is to be paid back by Allah and His Messenger. مَا يَقُوتُ بِهِ عِيَالَهِ. Whatever his loans were to help out his family. You see, if you take a loan out to put it into a second business, it's not on Allah and the Prophet to pay back that loan. But if you've taken out a loan to pay the bills of your house, if you've taken out a loan to be able to feed or to clothe your family and you cannot pay it back, it is upon Allah and upon His Messenger. فَإِن مَاتَ. And if the Prophet dies, وَلَمْ يَقْضِهِ. And the Prophet has not paid back that loan on your behalf, كَانَ عَلَى الْإِمَامِ قَضَاءُهُ. It's upon the Imam Ma'soom to pay that back. فَإِن لَمْ يَقْضِهِ كَانَ عَلَيْهِ وِزْرُهُ. And if the Imam is unable to pay it back, it's upon his wazir to be able to pay it back. Who is his wazir today? Marja. We're supposed to have a system in Islam that there is a place for us to raise funds to help people pay off their debts when they're overburdened by debts. The Imam continues in his hadith. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَقُولُ. For Allah has said, إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَالْمَسَاكِينِ وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا إِلَى قَوْلِهِ وَالْغَارِمِينَ. There is a group who are overburdened by debts that we are supposed to be paying their debts off over. Did you know before today that we're not supposed to kick people out of their houses if they go bankrupt? Did you know that before today? Did you know that we are supposed to be paying off people's debts? Did you know that we could actually offer people loans in a way in which that instead of them being forced to pay 3, 4, 500% APR, we could actually support them? Imagine presenting this in Islam to the people of lower economic areas within Vancouver. Imagine offering this to the world Instead of arguing constantly on Twitter and on Facebook and arguing on TikTok and all this nonsense. Can you imagine how many people we could help, we could save, we could support? The hadith that comes to us from the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. This hadith is quoted by Imam Ali alayhi salam in his letter to Malik al-Ashtar. Listen to this hadith. لن تقدس أمة لا يؤخذ للضعيف فيها حقه من القوي غير متتعتع. A nation in which the rights of the weak are not taken back without even the hesitation of stammering, that nation will never be considered as muqaddas in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. On the other side, Imam Ali alayhi salam says, تَتَبَعُّ الْعَوْرَاتِ مِنَ الْأَعْظَمِ السُّوْآتِ. To pursue the weaknesses of people is from amongst the worst vices in this world. When you see people living in poverty and struggling, we're supposed to help them, lift them out of this. Systematically, offer them this support the way Islam offered them this support. Can you imagine a tabligh in this way, as opposed to the way in which today we have no plan, or the way in which the online scene is just throwing shade at one another? Inshallah, we'll try to continue this topic a little bit more tomorrow night, and then conclude with our series as well. Look at the way the Quran and Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam support the oppressed, support the exploited, support the weak. Can you imagine an Islam tolerating a baby crying out for some water, and 30,000 people standing at the banks of the river Euphrates with unsheathed swords in order to stop that baby from having a drop of water? Can you imagine the way Islam looks at the oppressed and treats the downtrodden in this world? When Mukhtar al-Thaqafi caught Harmala, he said to him, "Tell me about the arrows that you struck on the 10th of Muharram." Amongst those, Harmala said, "I struck the arrow that embedded itself into the chest of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein." He said, "Tell me about the other arrows that you struck." He said, "I was the one who struck the arrow into the 6-month-old baby, Abdullah al-Radhi'." Abdullah, he is crying for his mother's milk. He is crying for water. They come and give the baby to Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. The narration says that he wraps the baby in cloth in order to be able to protect him from the heat of the sun. We ask you, O Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, indeed that white cloth will protect him from the heat of the sun, but how will it protect him from a 3-pronged arrow that is about to be fired into his neck? Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam takes this baby in his arms and presents him towards the enemy horde. I want you to imagine that you are standing there. You would have seen grown men crying, realizing what they have done, realizing that they have become so hard-hearted that they won't even allow a baby to be able to have a drink of water. I want you to see how small a baby is and how precious this child is. I want you to imagine that it is Asghar in front of you, and I want you to imagine that at this moment Umar ibn Sa'ad calls out towards Harmala, his master archman, and says to him, silence the sign of Hussein, for if the people begin to cry or continue to cry for this baby, they will not stop, they will not allow themselves, and they will give water to Hussein. Hussein will become too strong. You have to silence the sign of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. I want you to see how softly we deal with a baby. I want you to see how we treat a baby versus the way in which Harmala treated this baby. I want you to imagine for a moment that he takes out this three-pronged arrow. Do you know in history why the Arabs used to use three-pronged arrows? It is said that there are 3 reasons why they used to use them. From amongst the reasons why they used 3-pronged arrows was when they wanted to be able to break down a door, they would fire a 3-pronged arrow into the door, and then they would pull this arrow and it would break the door open. A second reason why they would use a 3-pronged arrow is because when they wanted to be able to slaughter the neck of a camel, using an ordinary knife would not work. They would take a 3-pronged arrow and shoot the arrow into the neck or across the neck of the camel, and this was enough to be able to slice the neck of the camel. I ask you, mu'mineen, look at this baby. I want you to tell me how tough is the neck of a camel and how soft is the neck of a 6-month-old baby that Harmala had to choose this type of arrow to slaughter Ali al-Asghar with. Silence the sign of Hussein, he says, for if Hussein is allowed to continue this, all of our men will become sorry for him. At this moment, I want you to imagine that Abu Abdullah al-Hussein takes Asghar and places him back into his arms. But I want you to imagine that standing by the tents is his mother, waiting for some news of her son. At this moment, Harmala takes this arrow, he places it into his bow, he pulls the arrow back, he lets it fly, it goes through the air, and it strikes Asghar in the neck so hard, it cuts from one side of the neck to the other side of the neck. It is said that it strikes the neck of Asghar so hard that it shocks his body, that it strikes him so hard that his arms flap like a bird. I want you to imagine Asghar looking into the eyes of his father as if to say, oh father, do not cry for me right now. It is my grandmother Fatima that is quenching my thirst. At this moment, all that Abu Abdullah al-Hussein can do is take the blood of Asghar and throw it upon himself. He wipes the blood of Asghar upon his face and upon his beard. He begins to walk back towards the tent. But how does he show this body of Asghar to his mother? All he can say is, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. He walks back towards the killing field. He's reciting Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. 7 times he has to walk back and forth. There is a line in the Maqtal. It is mentioned that on the 6th time that Abu Abdullah al-Hussein is walking, this time he is walking back towards the killing field. This time there is a voice that comes from the heaven. It says, oh Hussein, there is a mother desperately waiting to know what has happened to her baby. Do not keep her waiting any longer. This is the 7th time he walks back towards the tent. We are told at this moment that it is Ruqayya that comes running out. Ruqayya comes to greet her father. She says, oh father, did they quench the thirst of my baby brother Asghar? All Hussein can say is, take your brother's body. Hussein does not have the strength any longer to be able to hold him. The women come out. The mother of Asghar comes out and sees her beloved baby. they begin to cry, Wasghara, Wasghara, what did they do to my beloved son? It is said that Asghar is lying on the chest of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein today. And the reason for that is because a baby loves to lie and rest on the chest of his father.